I never imagined my life would take such an unexpected turn. My name is Alex, and I'm a simple man. I married the love of my life, Emma, 5 years ago. Emma is the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, and our life together has been wonderful. We even started our own event management business, which has grown successfully over the years. But it wasn't just us. Emma's mother, Linda, was a huge part of our lives and our business. She is a beautiful woman, always elegant and composed, and has always been supportive of our endeavors. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at work, Emma decided to take a vacation with her friends to relax. I stayed behind to manage the business. This was when things started to change. Linda and I began spending more time together, planning and organizing events. We had always had a good relationship, but something began to shift. I started noticing her in ways I hadn't before. The way she laughed, the way she looked when she was deep in thought, the curve of her smile. I couldn't help but feel drawn to her, and it scared me, but I couldn't stop it. Linda was not just my mother-in-law. She was a striking woman in her early 50s, with a grace and charm that drew people to her. Her long, dark hair, usually tied back in a neat bun, her deep green eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets, and her warm, inviting smile. All of these started to capture my attention in ways they hadn't before. I found myself thinking about her at odd times, my mind wandering to moments we shared during work. The scent of her perfume lingered in my thoughts, a soft floral aroma that sent shivers down my spine. Our closeness increased with each passing day. One evening, after a long day of planning a big event, Linda invited me over for dinner. Emma was still away, and it felt innocent enough. We talked and laughed over wine, reminiscing about old times and discussing future plans for the business. The atmosphere was warm and intimate. As the night grew darker, our conversation became more personal. Linda shared stories about her past, her dreams, and her regrets. I listened, captivated by her every word. After dinner, we moved to the living room, where Linda poured us more wine. The soft glow of the lamps created an intimate ambiance, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. She was wearing a simple, elegant dress that hugged her curves in all the right places. I could see the outline of her figure, the soft swell of her breasts, and it stirred something deep inside me. I tried to push those thoughts away, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. As we sat on the couch, our conversation continued. Linda talked about her late husband, Emma's father, and the love they had shared. There was a sadness in her eyes, a vulnerability that made her even more attractive. I felt a strong urge to comfort her, to hold her close, and tell her everything would be all right. She must have sensed my thoughts because she moved closer, her knee brushing against mine. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through my body. When it was time to leave, she walked me to the door. There was a moment of silence as we stood there, our eyes locked. Without thinking, I leaned in and kissed her. It was a soft, hesitant kiss, but it was electric. Linda pulled back, her eyes wide with surprise. "We shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, but there was a spark in her eyes that told me she felt the same way. I nodded, agreeing, but deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. The days that followed were filled with tension and longing. Linda and I tried to keep things professional, but the attraction between us was undeniable. We would steal glances at each other during meetings, our touches lingering a little longer than they should. It was thrilling and terrifying at the same time. One afternoon, while setting up for an event, we found ourselves alone in a dimly lit storage room. The air was thick with unspoken desire. Linda looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and longing. "Alex, we can't keep doing this," she said, but her voice was weak, betraying her true feelings. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. "I know, but I can't help how I feel," I replied. She didn't move away. Instead, she closed the distance between us, and our lips met in a passionate kiss. This time, there was no hesitation. Our hands explored each other's bodies, and we crashed to the floor, tearing each other's clothes off. The feel of her skin against mine was intoxicating. Her hands roamed over my body, igniting a fire within me. I couldn't get enough of her. We moved together, our bodies entwined in a dance of passion and desire. It was raw and primal, and I lost myself in the moment. Every touch, every kiss was filled with an intensity I had never experienced before. When it was over, we lay there, breathless and trembling. Reality began to set in, and the weight of what we had done crashed down on me. Linda looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of satisfaction and regret. "We can't let this happen again," she whispered, but there was a part of me that knew it wouldn't be that simple. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. The days that followed our first night together were filled with tension and excitement. I couldn't stop thinking about Linda, and every time we were together, the air was charged with unspoken desire. We tried to act normal, but it was impossible to ignore the electricity between us. I was torn between guilt and longing, constantly battling my feelings. Linda and I continued working closely together on various events. One day, we were preparing for a wedding at a beautiful venue by the lake. Emma was still away, and it was just the two of us. The setting was perfect, the sun casting a warm glow on the water, the gentle breeze rustling the trees. We spent the morning setting up tables and decorations, our hands occasionally brushing against each other, sending sparks of electricity through me. Around noon, we decided to take a break. Linda suggested we sit by the lake and have lunch. We found a secluded spot under a large tree, the perfect place to escape the midday sun. Linda had packed a picnic basket with sandwiches, fruit, and a bottle of wine. We sat on a blanket, eating and talking, the tension between us growing with each passing minute. As we finished our lunch, Linda poured us each a glass of wine. We toasted to the success of the upcoming wedding, but there was an unspoken understanding between us. We were toasting to something more, something deeper. As I took a sip of the wine, I couldn't help but notice how beautiful Linda looked in the soft afternoon light. Her eyes sparkled, and her smile was intoxicating. We sat in silence for a moment, just enjoying each other's company. Then, without warning, Linda leaned in and kissed me. This kiss was different from the first one. It was filled with urgency and need. I responded immediately, pulling her closer, my hands exploring her body. The wine, the setting, and our mutual desire made it impossible to resist. We fell back onto the blanket, our bodies entwined. Linda's hands were in my hair, pulling me closer, her breath hot against my skin. I kissed her neck, her collarbone, every inch of exposed skin I could find. She moaned softly, her fingers digging into my shoulders. I wanted her more than I had ever wanted anyone in my life. We were lost in each other, oblivious to everything else. Our clothes came off quickly, discarded in a heap beside us. The feel of her bare skin against mine was overwhelming. Her body was soft and warm, and I couldn't get enough of her. We moved together in a rhythm that felt natural, our bodies fitting perfectly. As we made love, I felt a connection with Linda that went beyond the physical. It was as if we were meant to be together, our bodies and souls intertwining. Every touch, every kiss, every movement was filled with passion and desire. The world around us disappeared, and it was just the two of us, lost in our own little universe. Afterward, we lay there, tangled in each other's arms, the afternoon sun casting a golden glow over us. I traced my fingers along Linda's arm, marveling at the softness of her skin. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of happiness and sadness. "This can't keep happening," she whispered, her voice trembling, "but I can't stay away from you." I nodded, understanding exactly how she felt. "I know," I replied, my voice just as shaky. "But I can't help how I feel about you, Linda." We lay there in silence for a while, just holding each other. The reality of our situation was starting to sink in, but neither of us wanted to face it. The thought of ending our affair was too painful to bear. We were addicted to each other, unable to resist the pull that kept bringing us together. As the sun began to set, we reluctantly got dressed and packed up our picnic. The drive back to the office was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, replaying every moment in my mind. The way Linda had looked at me, the feel of her body against mine. It was all I could think about. Back at the office, we tried to act normal, but it was impossible to ignore the tension between us. Every glance, every touch was filled with unspoken desire. We were playing a dangerous game, and we both knew it. But neither of us could stop. That night, as I lay in bed alone, I couldn't get Linda out of my mind. I wanted her, needed her, in a way that was almost painful. The memory of our time together by the lake was etched into my brain, and I knew that no matter how hard we tried, we wouldn't be able to stay away from each other. The next day, we were back at the venue, finishing the preparations for the wedding. The bride and groom arrived for a final walkthrough, and we had to put on our professional faces, hiding the turmoil inside. But every time Linda and I were alone, the tension was palpable. As the wedding ceremony began, Linda and I stood at the back, watching the happy couple exchange vows. It was a beautiful moment, and I couldn't help but think about my own wedding to Emma. The guilt came crashing down on me, but so did the longing for Linda. I glanced at her, and she met my eyes, a silent understanding passing between us. We were in too deep, and there was no turning back. The days after the wedding were a blur. The event had been a huge success, and Emma was finally back home, her presence a constant reminder of my guilt. But despite my best efforts, I couldn't get Linda out of my mind. Every time I saw her, my heart raced, and I was filled with an unbearable longing. Our stolen moments had become the most exciting parts of my life, and I couldn't stop myself from wanting more. One afternoon, while Emma was out shopping, I was alone in the office with Linda. We were going over plans for another big event. The tension between us was almost unbearable. I could see the desire in her eyes, and I knew she could see it in mine too. We tried to focus on work, but our minds were elsewhere. As we worked, our hands would occasionally brush against each other. Each touch sent a jolt of electricity through my body. I could see the same effect on Linda, her breath hitching every time our skin made contact. The air was thick with unspoken desire, and it was getting harder to resist. We finished going over the plans and started packing up. The office was quiet, and the only sound was the rustling of papers. Linda moved closer to me, her body brushing against mine. I could feel the heat radiating off her, and it drove me wild. I reached out and grabbed her hand, pulling her towards me. She didn't resist. Our lips met in a heated kiss, full of passion and need. I pushed her against the wall, my hands roaming over her body. She moaned softly, her fingers tangled in my hair. We were both breathing heavily, our bodies pressed tightly together. I could feel her heart beating as fast as mine, our desire taking over. We stumbled towards the desk, knocking over papers and office supplies in our haste. I lifted her onto the desk, her legs wrapping around my waist. Her dress rode up, revealing her smooth, bare skin. I ran my hands up her thighs, feeling the softness under my fingertips. She shivered under my touch, her eyes filled with lust. We tore at each other's clothes, desperate to feel skin against skin. Her blouse came off easily, and I marveled at the sight of her. Her breasts were full and inviting, and I couldn't resist taking one in my mouth. She gasped, arching her back, her fingers digging into my shoulders. The sound of her pleasure was intoxicating, and I wanted more. My hands moved to her waist, pulling down her skirt. She was left in just her underwear, and the sight drove me wild. I kissed my way down her body, savoring the taste of her skin. She moaned, her hips bucking against me. I couldn't get enough of her. I stood up and quickly shed my own clothes, my eyes never leaving hers. Her gaze was hungry, filled with desire. I moved back to her, our bodies coming together in a heated embrace. She wrapped her legs around me again, pulling me closer. I could feel her warmth, her need matching my own. We moved together in a rhythm that felt natural, our bodies fitting perfectly. The desk creaked under our weight, but we didn't care. The world around us disappeared, and it was just the two of us, lost in a whirlwind of passion. Every touch, every kiss was filled with an intensity that left us breathless. As we reached our climax, I could feel the tension in her body, the way she trembled under me. Her nails dug into my back, and I welcomed the pain, a reminder of our raw, primal connection. We cried out together, our voices echoing in the empty office. It was a release, both physical and emotional, and it left us both trembling. We lay there for a moment, catching our breath, our bodies still tangled together. The reality of what we had done began to set in, but neither of us wanted to move. I kissed her softly, a gentle reminder of our connection. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of satisfaction and regret. "We can't keep doing this," she whispered, her voice shaky. "It's not fair to Emma." I nodded, knowing she was right, but unable to say the words. "I know," I replied, my voice just as unsteady, "but I can't stay away from you." She sighed, resting her head against my chest. "I feel the same way," she admitted, "but we have to find a way to stop." I held her close, not wanting to let go. The thought of losing her was too painful to bear, but I knew she was right. We were playing with fire, and it was only a matter of time before we got burned. As we got dressed, the silence between us was heavy with unspoken words. We both knew we were in too deep, but neither of us was ready to let go. The pull between us was too strong, and the desire too intense. We were addicted to each other, and there was no easy way out. That night, as I lay in bed with Emma, I couldn't stop thinking about Linda. The memory of our time together was burned into my mind, and I knew that no matter how hard we tried, we wouldn't be able to stay away from each other. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. The affair between Linda and me continued, each encounter more passionate and forbidden than the last. We couldn't stay away from each other, our desire too strong to ignore. It was a dangerous game we were playing, but the thrill of the forbidden made it impossible to stop. We found moments whenever we could, each stolen glance, each secret touch, fueling the fire between us. One evening, Emma called to say she would be returning home the next day. Panic set in, and we knew we had to end our affair before she found out. That night, Linda and I met at a hotel room, our last chance to be together before everything came crashing down. The hotel room was simple, but the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. I arrived first, my heart pounding in my chest. I paced the room, waiting for Linda, my mind racing with thoughts of our impending separation. When she finally arrived, the sight of her took my breath away. She looked stunning, dressed in a simple yet elegant dress that clung to her curves. Her eyes were filled with a mix of sadness and desire, mirroring my own emotions. As soon as she closed the door behind her, we were in each other's arms. Our kisses were frantic, filled with a sense of urgency and desperation. We stumbled towards the bed, our hands roaming over each other's bodies, tearing at our clothes. The need to feel her skin against mine was overwhelming, and I couldn't get enough of her. We fell onto the bed, our bodies entwined. Linda's hands were in my hair, pulling me closer, her breath hot against my skin. I kissed her neck, her collarbone, every inch of exposed skin I could find. She moaned softly, her fingers digging into my shoulders. The sound of her pleasure was intoxicating, and I wanted more. Our clothes came off quickly, discarded in a heap beside the bed. The feel of her bare skin against mine was electrifying. Her body was soft and warm, and I couldn't get enough of her. We moved together in a rhythm that felt natural, our bodies fitting perfectly. The bed creaked under our weight, but we didn't care. The world around us disappeared, and it was just the two of us, lost in a whirlwind of passion. As we made love, I felt a connection with Linda that went beyond the physical. It was as if we were meant to be together, our bodies and souls intertwining. Every touch, every kiss, was filled with an intensity that left us breathless. The room was filled with the sounds of our passion, our moans and cries echoing off the walls. We reached our climax together, our bodies trembling with the force of our release. I could feel the tension in her body, the way she trembled under me. Her nails dug into my back, and I welcomed the pain, a reminder of our raw, primal connection. We cried out together, our voices mingling in the air, It was a release, both physical and emotional, and it left us both trembling. Afterward, we lay there, tangled in each other's arms, the reality of our situation beginning to set in. Linda looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of satisfaction and regret. "We can't let this happen again," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I can't stay away from you." I nodded, understanding exactly how she felt. "I know," I replied, my voice just as shaky. "But I can't help how I feel about you, Linda." We lay there in silence for a while, just holding each other. The reality of our situation was starting to sink in, but neither of us wanted to face it. The thought of ending our affair was too painful to bear. We were addicted to each other, unable to resist the pull that kept bringing us together. As the night grew darker, we knew we had to part ways. Emma would be home the next day, and we couldn't risk her finding out. The thought of saying goodbye was too much to bear, but we knew it was the only way. We got dressed slowly, savoring our last moments together. Every touch, every kiss, was filled with a sense of finality. When it was time to leave, we stood by the door, holding each other one last time. "I'll never forget you," Linda whispered, her voice breaking. "You've meant so much to me." I held her close, my heart breaking at the thought of losing her. "I'll never forget you either," I replied, my voice choked with emotion. "You'll always have a place in my heart." We shared one last kiss, a kiss filled with all the love and passion we had shared. It was a kiss goodbye, a final farewell to the affair that had consumed us. As we pulled away, tears streamed down Linda's face, and I could feel my own eyes burning with unshed tears. As I watched her walk away, a sense of emptiness settled over me. I knew that what we had was wrong, but it had also been the most intense, passionate experience of my life. The thought of going back to my normal life without her was unbearable, but I knew it was the only way. The next day, Emma returned, and life resumed its normal routine. Linda and I avoided each other as much as possible, focusing on the business and pretending nothing had happened. It was painful, but we knew it was for the best. The guilt of our actions weighed heavily on both of us. Emma noticed the tension, but assumed it was due to the stress of work. I wanted to confess everything to her, but I couldn't bear the thought of hurting her and destroying our marriage. Linda and I continued to work together, but the dynamic had changed. There was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. We were polite and professional, but the spark that had once burned so brightly was now just a smoldering ember. I missed her terribly, but I knew it was the right thing to do. Our affair had been a mistake, one that we could never repeat. The next day, Emma returned, and life resumed its normal routine. Linda and I avoided each other as much as possible, focusing on the business and pretending nothing had happened. It was painful, but we knew it was for the best. The guilt of our actions weighed heavily on both of us. Emma noticed the tension, but assumed it was due to the stress of work. I wanted to confess everything to her, but I couldn't bear the thought of hurting her and destroying our marriage. Linda and I continued to work together, but the dynamic had changed. There was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. We were polite and professional, but the spark that had once burned so brightly was now just a smoldering ember. I missed her terribly, but I knew it was the right thing to do. Our affair had been a mistake, one that we could never repeat. As weeks passed, the ache of longing and regret didn't disappear. Emma and I worked on strengthening our marriage, spending more quality time together. We went out for dinners, took weekend trips, and rekindled the romance that had brought us together in the first place. It was working, but there was still a part of me that yearned for Linda. One evening, after a particularly successful event, Emma and I were celebrating at home with a bottle of wine. We were laughing and reminiscing about our journey together, the ups and downs of building our business. Emma looked beautiful, her eyes sparkling with happiness. As she leaned in to kiss me, I felt a pang of guilt. I was determined to be the husband she deserved. "Alex, I've noticed you've been distant lately," Emma said, her voice soft and concerned. "Is everything okay?" I forced a smile, trying to hide the turmoil inside. I'm fine, Emma. Just a bit stressed with work, but I'm really happy to be here with you now. She nodded, accepting my answer, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I hated lying to her, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. It would destroy her, and I couldn't bear to see her hurt. The following days were a test of willpower. Linda and I saw each other at the office, but we kept our interactions strictly professional. The longing looks and stolen touches were gone, replaced by a cold, distant professionalism. It was the only way we could cope with the situation. One afternoon, while Emma was out meeting a client, Linda and I found ourselves alone in the office. The tension between us was palpable, but we both knew we had to resist. We couldn't afford another slip-up. Linda was sitting at her desk, typing on her computer, when I approached her. "Linda, we need to talk," I said, my voice low and serious. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with sadness and regret. "I know, Alex. We need to put this behind us." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "It's been hard, but we have to move on, for Emma's sake and for the business." She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I miss you, Alex, but I know we can't continue like this. It's tearing us apart." I felt a lump in my throat, the pain of our separation still fresh. "I miss you too, Linda, but we have to be strong. We made a mistake, and we need to make things right." She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "You're right. We need to focus on the future and what's best for everyone." As I walked away, I felt a sense of finality. Our affair was truly over, and it was time to let go. The weight of our actions hung heavy on my shoulders, but I knew it was the only way forward. Over the next few weeks, things began to settle. Linda and I found a new rhythm in our working relationship, maintaining a professional distance. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The longing was still there, but it was buried under layers of guilt and determination. Emma and I continued to work on our marriage, finding joy in the small moments we shared. The guilt of my affair with Linda still haunted me, but I was determined to be a better husband. I owed it to Emma and to myself. One evening, as we were having dinner, Emma looked at me with a smile. "Alex, I'm so glad we've been spending more time together. It feels like we're reconnecting." I smiled back, feeling a warmth in my heart. "I feel the same way, Emma. I love you, and I'm committed to making our marriage work." She reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "I love you too, Alex. We've been through so much together, and I know we can get through anything." As we sat there, holding hands and sharing a moment of connection, I felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it. I had made mistakes, but I was determined to make things right. In the quiet moments, I still thought of Linda. The memories of our time together were like a shadow, always lingering at the edges of my mind. But I knew that I had to let go. My future was with Emma, and I was committed to rebuilding what we had. As I lay in bed that night, holding Emma close, I made a silent promise to myself. I would be the husband she deserved, and I would never let anything come between us again. The past was behind us, and it was time to look to the future. Months passed, and the pain of our separation began to fade. Emma and I grew closer, our marriage stronger than ever. I focused all my energy on making her happy and building our future together. Linda and I maintained a cordial relationship, but the passion we once shared was a distant memory. I often thought about what could have been, but I knew it was a path I could never go down again. Our event management business continued to thrive, and we were busier than ever. Emma and I worked tirelessly, our shared passion for the business rekindling the bond between us. We celebrated each success together, finding joy in the little victories. It felt good to be united again, to work as a team with the woman I loved. One evening, Emma and I were hosting a gala event at a luxurious hotel. It was a grand affair, with elegant decorations, live music, and a guest list that included some of the most influential people in the city. The atmosphere was electric, filled with laughter and celebration. Emma looked stunning in a red dress that hugged her curves, her smile lighting up the room. As the evening progressed, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. We had come so far, overcome so much. I watched Emma as she moved through the crowd, charming everyone with her grace and elegance. She was the love of my life, and I was determined to never let anything come between us again. Later that night, after the guests had left and the cleanup crew was finishing their work, Emma and I found ourselves alone in the ballroom. The soft glow of the chandeliers cast a romantic light over the empty room. I took her hand, pulling her close. "You were amazing tonight," I whispered, kissing her softly. She smiled, wrapping her arms around my neck. "We make a great team," she replied, her eyes sparkling with happiness. "I'm so proud of what we've accomplished together." I kissed her again, deeper this time, my hands roaming over her back. The passion between us was as strong as ever, and I felt a rush of desire. "I love you, Emma," I said, my voice filled with emotion. "I'm so grateful for you." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with love. "I love you too, Alex, more than anything." In that moment, everything else faded away. The mistakes of the past, the regrets and the pain, all of it disappeared. It was just the two of us, wrapped in each other's arms, our love stronger than ever. We moved together, our bodies pressed close, the heat between us building. We made our way to a secluded corner of the ballroom, the soft fabric of the curtains providing a sense of privacy. Emma's hands were in my hair, her lips hot against mine. I could feel her heart beating as fast as mine, our desire taking over. I lifted her onto a nearby table, her legs wrapping around my waist. Our kisses were urgent, filled with a need that had been building for months. My hands roamed over her body, feeling the softness of her skin through the fabric of her dress. She moaned softly, her fingers digging into my shoulders. The sound of her pleasure was intoxicating, and I wanted more. I reached for the zipper of her dress, slowly pulling it down, revealing the smooth curve of her back. She shivered under my touch, her eyes filled with desire. I kissed my way down her neck, savoring the taste of her skin. Her hands were on my shirt, quickly unbuttoning it, her touch sending shivers down my spine. As our clothes fell away, the intensity of our desire grew. The feel of her bare skin against mine was electrifying. We moved together, our bodies fitting perfectly, the world around us disappearing. It was just us, lost in a whirlwind of passion. Every touch, every kiss was filled with an intensity that left us breathless. We moved together in a rhythm that felt natural, our bodies entwined in a dance of love and desire. The room was filled with the sounds of our passion, our moans and cries echoing off the walls. We reached our climax together, our bodies trembling with the force of our release. It was a moment of pure connection, both physical and emotional, and it left us both trembling. We held each other close, our breaths mingling, the world slowly coming back into focus. As we lay there, tangled in each other's arms, the reality of our situation began to set in. The mistakes of the past were behind us, and the future was filled with hope and promise. I looked into Emma's eyes, seeing the love and trust that had always been there. "I'll never let anything come between us again," I whispered, my voice filled with determination. "You're everything to me, Emma." She smiled, her eyes brimming with tears. "And you're everything to me, Alex. I'm so grateful for you." We held each other close, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. The road to forgiveness and healing had been long, but we had come out stronger on the other side. Our love was a flame that burned bright, a beacon of hope and strength. As the night wore on, we finally got dressed, our hearts light with the promise of a new beginning. We walked out of the ballroom hand in hand, ready to face the future together. The past was behind us, and the future was ours to create. The journey had been difficult, filled with mistakes and regrets, but it had also been a journey of love and redemption. We had found our way back to each other, and that was all that mattered. As we stepped into the night, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, our love stronger than ever.